Okay, well, welcome everybody. Today you are joining us here, well, all of us in different spaces, but Native Child and Family Services of Toronto's first learning series as part of our Decolonizing Child Welfare Learning Series. So our first webinar. This is one of a series of opportunities that we'll be having to sit together over the course of the year. For those of you who were with us on September 30th, at our big panel around decolonizing child welfare and all of our important responses to the work that needs to be done in the sector, you'll remember we had about 1,200 people and a really, really great conversation, and that we promised that we would keep the conversation going. And so we're going to keep coming back throughout the course of the year, meeting in spaces like this, meeting in smaller groups with community, meeting within the agency to have this conversation around decolonizing child welfare and what that means to families here in the GTA. When I'm looking at the participant list, I'm so happy to see folks from all walks of life. I recognize some of the names of community members here in Toronto, folks from other provinces, people that work in different sectors, and I'm just so happy to see you all here today. My name is Terry Jaffe. I'm the Senior Supervisor of Cultural Programs here at Native Child and Family Services of Toronto, and it's my pleasure to be the moderator, the host for our conversation today. I am here with Vivian Roy, Dr. Jeffrey Schiffer, Ken Richard, and Mark Atanasoff to just get a little bit deeper into our conversation. So I thought we'd start with some introductions, and I think a lot of these names are familiar, but our Executive Director, Dr. Jeffrey Schiffer. Hi, Jeffrey. Jeffrey joined the agency in 2018. He came to Toronto and did work with the city. He's on various boards. He is actually, I don't even know, busy on Zooms from probably morning till late at night. Doing this great work, doing advocacy for children and families here in the city of Toronto. And thank you, Jeffrey, for being here. Founder of Native Child and Family Services, Ken Richard. Hi, Ken. You've got a beautiful fire. You look cozy behind you. Ken did retire, but keeps coming for these great conversations and is now the director of the Indigenous Spirit Fund for Native Child and Family Services. And we're so happy to have Ken and all of his experience here in the room talk a little bit about how the agency was founded, the mandate that was given to us by community. And Ken is the recipient of so many awards and has so much knowledge, including the Toronto Civic Award of Merit, Aboriginal Affairs Award, and the Meritorious Service Cross, which was presented to him by the Governor General of Canada, and that recognizes his outstanding leadership and the example that he set for others to follow around improving the quality of life for community. And so we're really grateful, Ken, to have you and all of your wisdom here in the room. Mark Atanasoff, who is the Director of Quality Assurance Decolonization here at Native Child and Family Services. And Mark is, sorry, Mark, I lost my train of thought of what I was going to say about you, but I'm always love talking to Mark and listening to the stories of his mother's experience at residential school. And I know that you're going to talk a little bit about that in your presentation, and appreciate you being here today too, Mark. And probably should have started with the woman in the room, but Ani Vivian, and welcome here today. Vivian is a knowledge keeper here at Native Child and Family Services. I think of her as a community grandma. She is from Wikwemikong First Nation, and we are happy to have Vivian's kindness, wisdom, and experience in the room. And so before we go any further with that, I do want to ask Vivian to open this meeting up in a good way. Thank you, Vivian.
I can do that. Thank you, Terry. That was such a lovely welcome. It was nice to hear. I'm going to begin in my own language. That's what I was taught to do. So you just want to take a moment of silence to yourself, listen with your ears, and just sit comfortably. Mampisi go Toronto do da minandon janaki mampi. Showem nedo nad motionang nango mi minon mang. Ina showem nedo ipwech me go we nad moshang we menagividiang. Mina we minamadziang. Mina we minakyang and sigishkak. Kinagundak ninok minakuyok mumpiem nam the bot, nad muge noge. We minamadziat, we minanakiat. Mina kinagane bidonjisak. Mina oxygic, mina ekaik, nad muge noge, minayat. Thank you very much. I just ask Creator to come in and sit with us, to help us today so we can hear each other in a good way and use good voices and to help us with our voice so we can talk in a good way. And I also ask for special prayers for all those who may not be feeling well, for all the children and the men and the women that are in the circle today, and our elders in the community. I ask for blessings for them and to help us on this day. Miigwech for that, for listening. I'll pass it over back to you, Terry.
Vivian, thank you for those good words. So I was thinking a little bit about, well, a lot about this panel and why are we here today? And we had a meeting, the group of us this morning, and they really inspired me and grounded me in why are we here today? And, you know, for me, when I think why are we here, Indigenous people were never consulted on any parts of the system, never consulted on the Indian Act or the residential school system or all of these things that continue to impact children and families and us as a community. And so this is an opportunity to sit with community, consult community, talk to community, and have this experience over the course of the learning series to ground our work and to advocate for our work and to make change where change can be made. I was really inspired, Jeffrey. You probably don't realize that I've been saying these words to myself a lot since you did a presentation on decolonization back in the spring. You know, we have the choice to replicate or innovate. So I'm quoting you. But I think about that a lot, right? So there's all these systems and the systems can just replicate themselves if we don't think about them. But we're at this moment in time where can we innovate? And so that's really, I think, the heart of why we're here today and why we're doing this work. And I want to, I guess at this point, turn it over to Ken, who is going to do a presentation I'm really looking forward to listening to and talk a lot about what got us here. So Ken, I will, well, maybe enjoy your tea for a moment, but I'll pass it over to you.
You just have to unmute.
And you're on mute, Ken.
Thanks. So I want to just thank Vivian for those words. You know, I don't understand Anishinaabe, but whenever somebody speaks to me in the language, I just feel better. So it's a great way, and I really understand why you do that, notwithstanding the ignorance that many of us have about the language. Which there's my word. Yeah, I'm speaking language for that. If you put up the slide, I'm going to get right to. You know, I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to talk about. I'm triggered by the visuals that you will now see. You just go to the first one. I just want to focus on an image there, and this is a picture of a young girl, a young Cree girl, it turns out, taken in the 70s and taken by me. It was a picture. I took a few of these photographs. These are photographs that were really goodbye pictures. They were pictures that many Indigenous mothers wanted to have because their children were in the process of being removed and adopted. And, you know, back in those days, the cell phone camera was not in existence, and photography was a luxury of the middle class. And you can bet that Indigenous folks in the child welfare system were not middle class, so not many pictures. In fact, when you reflect on pictures of Indigenous kids back in the day, what you typically see is institutional shots. Kids in church, at a residential school, kids being promoted essentially to some extent as commodities. So this is a shot taken. It's really the story about a child that was about to disappear. I was reflecting on this picture, and I've been talking about it quite a bit. This girl would be about in her 50s now. She may well be on your caseload at Native Child and Family Services as a grandmother. Because, what happened to her, I have no clue. The chances of her being adopted out to Southern Ontario were very high. The likelihood actually of her being sent further away is actually even higher. There was a whole industry when I entered child welfare, child removal, and it was a system. It was a system of child welfare had one service, it was the removal of the children, and one service to children, and that was making them disappear, essentially as far away as possible from their natural families and communities. And that was the way it was. And obviously that was something that we're reflecting very seriously on today. But it may well be that that this child, about 5 or 6 years old there, look at her face, a little bit apprehensive. Well, who did she? I was taking a picture of her. I was one of many social workers she may have had in her life, but she was totally alone. And that's what I see when I see photographs of these kids that were taken. And, we see them in residential schools, but this is a good shot of child welfare. An isolated child, sure, she's dressed nicely. Yes, she's got a tricycle, but you can just look at that little face and you got to feel a little bit heartbroken when you do that. So if why were we doing this? Why was child welfare? And I stumbled into child welfare quite accidentally, and it really opened my eyes to realities. And if you go to the next slide, I just elaborate that. Child welfare is predicated on an assumption that is completely false most of the time. And when it is real, it's very real, but it's about the need to save Indigenous children. And in this case, this is an actual logo from a child welfare agency in Southern Ontario, Oxford CAS, who had this logo up until actually recently. They're no better, no worse than any other logos, but it shows you the attitude, the mindset, the colonial institution of child welfare. This was British imperialism writ large. This was Britannia herself, the ultimate icon of British colonialism, with her outstretched shield and the little kids getting saved. And what were they being saved from? Well, their Indigenous reality in this case. If you go to the next slide, I'll show you what the standard was. And what was the image of the family back in those days? This was it. And I call this the family I never had, and most of us didn't. But this was etched into our minds of the ideal Canadian family that was put forth in the 50s, 60s, and 70s was in fact a Southern California artifact that didn't even exist there. But everybody lived in these nice houses in Bel Air, and they had dads that wore ties to work, and they came home and they went through the family album of all those precious photographs from the cottage days. So this was kind of the standard, the yardstick by which Indigenous children were measured. And that little girl in the previous shot, her family would have failed on any number of accounts, because guess what? That family was in the midst of multiple expressions of a trauma that went back multiple generations. So achieving this sort of middle class or upper middle class standard was impossible. Children's aid workers going in using yardsticks like this were bound to go pretty quickly to a very intrusive and back to that save mentality. If you go to the next shot, how did that transpire? How did that manifest itself? Well, I showed you the picture of the child. I'm showing you this picture. This is a marketing shot. This is another shot. And you know what? I want to say that many people that were doing these things were well-meaning people and thought this was in children's best interest. We've deconstructed that to be a complete falsehood, but you can see what was happening back in the day. These are pictures from the Adopt Indian and Métis Children campaign that was started in the 50s, I think went into the 60s. And it was, if you look at the language that is utilized there, safe in your hands. So that rescue mentality manifests writ large. You see the happy baby there under the quilt with the caring and loving hands. You see in the next one, out of nowhere into here. Where do you suppose nowhere is, folks? Well, nowhere in the frame of mind of this time and this place was their Indigenous family. And you don't have to read the fine print on this. You'll see that it's all about that savior mentality, that mindset that Indigenous families are less than, and that the appropriate services for Indigenous children is actually the removal. So out of nowhere into here. And the more I look at this one, the woman holding the baby looks remarkably like June Cleaver, the mother in the previous shot from an old episode of Leave It to Beaver. So again, we're wrapped up in care and concern, but actually equaling just another example of the commodification of Indigenous children and the kind of oppressive practices that resulted in the kind of genocide we're talking about today. This was one of the tools by which that genocide was actually manifest. Next slide. But you know, some good things happened. In the 90s, and I'm going to take us to Toronto. We're a Toronto agency, although you know I could be speaking about multiple cities across the country in terms of some of the more bleak statistics here. You know, about 20% of the homeless and over 25% of the absolute homeless folks in Toronto are Indigenous, and
Just give it a second there. Might be having some tech challenges.
And well, when we had our drop-in center below a bar, some call this the good old days at Native Child, and below a bar on Yonge Street, we had a lot of kids dropping in, and what did we what I'm sorry, the flash I'm going to seize. So the when I did a survey of these folks in terms of their background, the kids that were dropping in on Yonge Street, all of them, and I say, you know, my staff say, it's true, Ken, get with the program. They're all breakdowns in child welfare. All these 15, 16, 18-year-olds that were living on the streets in the 90s, and you'll remember back then, and I'm gonna tell a more in-depth story on that in a moment, but they were products of that child welfare system. So that little girl in the first slide may well have been one of those kids on the street, may well have been a trafficked kid, may well be on your caseload today. And the point being made is that this is a problem that just created more problems. To this day, I don't know if it's still true, Jeff, maybe you'll comment on that in your presentation. At the time when we were mobilizing child welfare, wow, 10% of Indigenous children in care in Toronto were Indigenous. And we represent about 1% of the total population. So there's a lot that calls into question decisions that were made back in the day with respect to best interests of kids. Go to the next slide, please. I know I'm running out of time, Previ. I had a hard time spelling squeegee, but I finally found the right spelling. I believe that's correct. You were all going to remember this. Anybody who was in Toronto in the 90s, you know, you pull up at a stop sign, all these kids run out and they squeegee your car. And it got very irritating after a while and very intimidating and chaotic. And what did the city do instead of getting at the problem? Of course, it made squeegeeing illegal. So, but we had a number of kids that were acting in the 90s as squeegee kids, all of them adoption, child welfare breakdowns. Tim, Rob, Kevin, and Steve. This was a crew of kids who, because they had lost their natural families and their adopted families had broken down, had created their own family. They lived in what they called a crib in the Rosedale Valley Ravine. And those who drive down that ravine, and I know a lot of folks here from out of town, but it's a lovely thing with mansions, you know, on either side and a wooded area in front. And we'll see there right now, because the leaves are falling, you'll see these blue tarps, just see these encampments. Well, these folks, these four kids had a homeless encampment, what they call a homeless or a houselessness encampment there. And we're not part of any other world other than their own world that they created for themselves, which is very self-destructive. And the world of engaging with us in our drop-in, thankfully, we were able to establish good relations with these folks. And we, you know what, some of our staff will probably cry today when they look at that word Kevin, because they know who I'm talking about. Joanne McKenna, one of our long-term workers, will tell you about Kevin. Kevin being a beautiful I'm not sure what his tribal affiliation was. I think he was pretty far north in origin, but through interventions, him and his brother were adopted to a family in Kitchener, a lovely family of school teachers. Kevin, that broke down, as did Tim's, Rob's, and Steve's, and he ended up on the streets in on Young Street. His brother ended up jumping into the Niagara River and committing suicide. So the tragedy of just this one name is writ large. Kevin was found dead in his crib in Rosedale Valley Ravine. He had been probably, we don't know, wasn't investigated. He was either beaten up or he'd been struck by a car. He had made it back to the crib. And there you go, Kevin dying, little Anishinaabe boy dying in basically the lights of the Rosedale Valley dining room mansion. So if there's any, if you want to picture the tragedy of Indigenous children, just think about Kevin dying in a tent while another reality, the reality of upper middle class Canada, had their dinner. And it's something I can barely bear to talk about. Tim, Rob, and Steve all died prematurely as well. Steve lasted the longest, a life of heroin addiction and jail time, culminating in his death in his 40s of a liver disease. Tim and Rob, both very violent deaths. I won't go into those, but they were one of scores of kids that came through our program. All of them related to adoption breakdown. Next slide. Well, I just want to end this sort of historical. If you just stick with that one, this is a poster from a litigation that I was actively involved in as a expert witness, and then went on to do some additional work with the foundation that came out of it. There was a settlement in the about 5 years ago now that was brought upon by folks here in Ontario, First Nations members to the north, whose identity had been erased through the foster care system, and they sued. And you know, it's become a national inquiry that culminated in an actual payout of compensation, and a couple of premiers, not Ontario, but notably Greg Selinger in Manitoba, and the fellow in Saskatchewan whose name escapes me, apologizing for their behavior. But fundamentally, in truth, it was a federal responsibility to keep those kids safe. But we won't get into jurisdictional issues. One of the other big issues, we'll just move to the next slide. So I being on fire with respect to the injustices of child welfare, I didn't last very long, obviously, working for the Children's Aid Societies, but I did last long in child welfare. I was at that point committed to devoting my energy. I don't know about my life and career, but at least for that moment, I was on fire. But as life happens, I ended up moving to Toronto for strictly personal reasons. So I left my Winnipeg home and stumbled in Toronto upon a guy named Gus Hashawaski. And if there's anybody that we can enshrine as the founder, okay, call me the founder. And indeed I was at the executive level. But if you want to know who actually mobilized the community, I want to say Gus's name because his name isn't really stated too much. He's not only the founder of Native Child and Family Services from the community perspective. He went on to work with Aboriginal Legal Services. He went on to found Anishinaabe Health Toronto. So a very significant, self-deprecating guy. Sick most of his life, a residential school survivor. But if you want to talk about Indigenous spirit, Gus had it. And he was the kind of guy, you know, child welfare can really divide the community. It's a very emotional issue, and it's hard to talk about it without getting mad. Gus didn't get mad. He wanted to get even, and he wanted to get even by the development of our own self-determined child and family services. And as it happens, as a result of multiple bad reviews of the child welfare system, notably a fellow named Richard Cardinal, who found himself in a fire, sentenced to death in Texas but he was a little kid from northern Manitoba who had been adopted. There was some pivotal media issues that created a spark, and that spark, in addition to advocacy going on at the First Nations level, saw legislation change across the country that said, and this is the typical phraseology, that Indian and Native people, where possible, I love that one, may provide their own child and family services. So Gus and a few approached me, who I just kind of happened to meet him, and he said, MSW, oh, okay, you're going to chair the committee. I'm going, okay. So it was like a gift that Gus brought to me. And we surrounded ourselves with some of the significant leaders of the day, Barbara Namagabo, Fred Wheatley, Ernie Benedict. These are elders that we did consultations with. We went through a process of really making sure that we thought through what we wanted to do. And we, of course, lobbied the local provincial office to become a child welfare agency, and they said yes. Now, I wanted to say that I had sent a slide here that was modified a little bit. I just want to say that right now, those last 2 points are not valid so much because we have pretty much a full designation of Indigenous services right across the province. You go to the next slide. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm racing through this. So we shook hands with a couple of governments actually in the early 80s, and in the early 90s, and oh goodness, I'm sorry, and we had a deal. We had a deal as early as 1992 that we would become a child welfare agency. It wasn't until 2002 that we kind of gave up and said, we're being danced outside, and anybody who knows culture knows what that kind of metaphor is. It was a talk and no action, and we were pretty tired of lobbying on child welfare. But it was a gift. That stalling was a gift for the agents because it allowed us to develop other services that Jeff's going to talk about. It allowed us a little bit of space to think through child welfare and the model of service delivery, and build actually a supportive prevention program and a clinical program. Because we knew that if we just got the caseload and all we had was a child welfare mandate, we were in danger of just reinventing, not the same wheel over and over again. So it was at once a real challenge, but at the end of the day, it was a gift. And if you go to how did we break this logjam where it was continuously stalled? If you go to the next slide, we said, well, no, the one before that, we said that well, maybe the way of doing, never mind Ken Richard or Gus or whoever the hell is writing the great papers and doing the great lobby efforts. What about our clients? Because we knew that most of our clients that were working with us at that time said, you're working with us, but the Catholic Children's Aid is coming tomorrow. So why don't you guys have your mandate? And we said, well, we don't have our mandate because we haven't been able to actually get that without try as we may. And I don't know who, I'd like to take credit, but I'm not sure it was me. We said, well, why don't we petition the courts on this? And why don't we see if there's any Indigenous families in Toronto that want to get a little heftier on the issue and press the issue a little bit, because we had a scenario here in Toronto that others didn't have. While we did not have First Nation status, so we didn't have the benefit of Indigenous political help, we did have the existence of the Catholic Children's Aid Society and the Jewish Child and Family Services. So we said, well, let's just think this through. You've got a Catholic agency and a Jewish agency, but you're saying no to the Native agency. And that's when the lights went on for the province, and we were able to settle this out of court. But to this day, there's about a 900-page affidavit somewhere, Jeff. Maybe Valerie can find it for you, that if you want to read that kind of history, it's very well articulated there. So we settled out of court. And in 2004, Native Child and Family Service became the only designated urban child and family service agency in the country. So, Miigwech, that's the history. Thank you very much. I might reappear at another webinar later. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I really appreciate the walkthrough. the heart that you brought to that story, and then just also to take a moment, and I've heard you talk about them before, but always to take a moment to remember Tim and Ron and Steve and Kevin. And I'm grateful that they're teachers for us now, and informing that work we do. So thank you for sharing today. And next up is Jeffrey. So I guess you pick it up where Ken left off, and Ken talk about the origin story of the agency, and now turn it over to you for a little bit about where we're at today.
Thank you, Terry. Yeah, I also want to acknowledge Vivian and thank you for starting us off in a good way. And thank Ken. You know, I've heard different articulations of that story at different times, and I always appreciate hearing it. And you know, one thing that you didn't talk about, Ken, that I'll do my best to reiterate is really, you know, when I first came to Native Child, I always asked about the service model, and Ken will tell you that, you know, that initial group, many of those folks that he talked about, and a handful of staff at the beginning of Native Child did participate in 4 days of ceremony, and through that process of ceremony, our service model was articulated. And I've heard Ken say before that, you know, the delay in getting mandate was beneficial, because by the time that Native Child did take on, you know, the child welfare mandate, it already had a really important foundation of prevention services that could then be integrated into the colonial mandate that was being accepted. And I think what the service model speaks to is a recognition by those community leaders that, as Ken said, taking the mandate and reinventing the same wheel isn't going to do anything. A fundamental change that needed to happen was decolonizing or transforming, or whatever word you want to use to describe the change that needs to happen, but affecting that change through integrating culturally grounded services that we sometimes talk about as holistic services, right? That our sector sometimes talks about as prevention or early intervention services, but all of the Indigenous grounded support services. And you know, 10 years after that mandate, you know, in 2014, and this is before my time, you know, Ken and others had the foresight to go back to community and say, how have we done in the last 10 years? And there was a reconciliation process that took place where Ken and others sat in circle with community. And then shortly after I came on was the 15-year mark where we revisited that group. And in those conversations, we consistently heard that you know, some of the most transformative part of our practice was driven by those prevention service, those holistic services at the center of Native Child. And that's really sort of the hallmark of the multi-service nature of Native Child and our mission of changing child welfare. And yes, we stepped on it, we stepped in and we took that mandate, we advocated for it. And I think one thing I heard from community during that process of reconciliation 15 years into the mandate was to keep expanding prevention services, right? And that's what we have seen over the last 4 years is sort of the decrease of the child welfare side of our agency while we increase the prevention side. And I'm not going to get too into the stats or the numbers. Mark may speak a little bit about that later, but we can say that, you know, over the last 4 years, year over year, the number of kids in care has been going down, about 8% year over year, I believe. And we've been increasing our prevention services. So there's obviously a connection there, right? Had been reflecting a lot on the conversations that we'd had with community over the course of the pandemic. Not only the community that we spoke with for that reconciliation process, but over the course of the pandemic, we also started 2 new community advisory groups as we were building our new Aboriginal child and family centers in Malvern and in Mount Dennis. At the same time, obviously, we were going through all of the painful processes of unearthing all of these little ones across the country, which again motivated all of these conversations about all of the history that Ken was talking about, and that colonial system that, as he said so articulately, just created more problems, right? And though Native Child has done a phenomenal work in addressing, you know, those issues directly, I still fundamentally believe that a lot of the barriers to us continuing that journey are enshrined in legislation, in policy standards, and in practices, in a lot of the tools that we were not consulted in the development of. And that made me reflect on this current iteration of child welfare redesign, and those are the ministry's words, right? And this has happened many times before, but right now in Ontario, we find ourselves in a climate where the province says, We want to transform child welfare yet again. And of course, there's a subset, there's a recognition that a fundamental piece of that work needs to happen in the Indigenous sector. You know, in the words of the ministry, they refer to that as a distinct Indigenous approach to child welfare. And I genuinely do think that we have some strong partners at the ministry level, but I think that we need to walk this journey together with community. So we were reflecting a lot on the work that needs to happen to change the system, right? And we said on September 30th in that panel that Native Child has a long history. It is in fact grounded in and was created by the community, leaders like Ken and others, like Gus, like others. We have had consistent mechanisms for engaging with community and co-developing the work that we do. But I think this next phase of transformation, it needs to be transparent, it needs to be accountable, and it needs to be community led. And for me, the first piece of that is the transparency piece, right? And so I think through a lot of the conversations I've had, not only with community members that access our service, but a lot of our partner agencies and a lot of other stakeholders in the community, you know, it's pretty clear that we don't all have a common understanding of the work that happens at Native Child, of what happens when somebody picks up the phone to report a potential concern about the safety of a child, what is done with that information, what happens when somebody knocks on the door, what happens after that. And so this learning series really gives us an opportunity to chunk out that whole process in discrete little pieces, to describe with complete transparency what happens right now at Native Child, and then to talk through that. With a number of different people in a number of different places. And I want to say that we have convened, as we said on September 30th, a group of community members that have a long history of engagement with Native Child, accessing a lot of our different programs and services, whether it's Aboriginal Head Start or our daycares or our clinical services or our youth programming or our child and family well-being, the child protection side of our business. And we sat in virtual circle. I wish it could have been in person, but in virtual circle with these folks on Monday night. And it was incredibly energizing to hear the thoughts and perspectives, to hear the recognition that Native Child was unquestionably born in community and has this foundation that is representative and was created by the Indigenous community in Toronto, but that there also is this tension, this inescapable tension that came with us accepting a mandate that we needed to take, but that's heavy in so many ways, that child welfare mandate, because so many pieces of it still are not controlled by us, still were not designed by us, and still create a lot of relational and real concrete issues for us as an agency. This group has agreed to move with us through this learning series, and every time we put a piece of our practice on the table to think about that, to reflect on it, to talk about their lived experience with it, and to make recommendations. And so I'm really looking forward to, over the next year, walking this journey not only with that group, but with others that are with us here today and in other spaces, to break down our practice and begin to generate a bunch of concrete recommendations that we can then take to our partners at the ministry and elsewhere, to articulate some of the changes that we need to see happen for the Indigenous community across the city of Toronto. And we'll then be able to do our report back September 30th of next year. So I know that I'm just watching the clock here, and I know that we've got a couple of other speakers. And so I want to just, maybe I'll stop there for today, Terry, and turn things back to you, because I want to make sure we have ample time to hear from both Vivian and Mark, and then have also some questions and comments with folks who've taken the time to join us today. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Jeff, thank you very much. So Vivian, yeah, we're going to turn it over to you. And this is, I think, the important part of the presentation where we listen to, as I called you at the beginning, community grandmother. And I'm really glad that you're joining today. And I know we talked about how you want to speak from the heart, and I love listening to you when you speak from the heart. So I'm excited, Vivian. Thank you.
Okay, where should I begin? Because Jeffrey and Ken already took my words. But I'm going to start from the beginning. When I talk about stuff, I always talk from my own experience. That's how I've learned. That's how I've learned to walk my path, is being able to fix those things that I've even made errors on. You know, I've grown from my own experiences, because it wasn't an easy journey. So when you talk about child welfare, I wasn't care myself in the 60s. I was in care, and my mother raised 6 of us kids alone, and we were very sheltered. So how we ended up in care was, I guess she didn't send us to school, because I did ask about it. Why were we in care? We weren't part of the 60s group, but we were in care because my mother did not send us to school. So they had to send the agency, the CAS, onto the reserve to come and get us. So we were forced into school. That's how we ended up in care at my age at that time. And, that wasn't a very good experience being in care. I remember being a little girl. I was put in a dress, like a little dress, and I had these like scrawny little bony legs. And I remember feeling ashamed for the first time in my life. I felt shame. The home that I was in, just wanted this nice little girl. And that's how I was sent. So growing up, going back home to my mother, we went to school. I was there till about grade 8. I was on with my mother till about grade 8, and I ended up being picked up by the police services, because I was did things that were not good. So I was picked up right off my reservation and brought into a juvenile detention home. And yeah, I basically went on my own since then. I ended up in a group home after that. I ended up having children at a very young age. I had children at a young age. I was 18 when I had my first daughter, and I was already into alcohol myself at that age. And CAS became involved in my life. I didn't know what CAS was about. They just came, took my kids, and I was very upset because I didn't know anything about them. My automatic response was to kick her out of my house. I get the hell out of my house. I shouldn't use those words, sorry, but sometimes they just come out. Give me creative for those words. Yeah, so I didn't know what she was there, and my kids did end up in care too. But my mother took my kids. I went into a full recovery program. So I went into a recovery program for about 5 months. I was in this recovery home. And I didn't use my language throughout that whole time. I kind of forgotten about my language. But moving out to Sudbury on my own with my daughter, I started to meet community people. I met aunties and uncles and sorry. So I met aunties and uncles that started teaching me my culture. I didn't know anything about my culture growing up. And then I was going back home to visit my mother and, teaching her about my culture. And I went back to school later on. I decided I wanted to go to school. When my kids got big enough, I went back to school, and I could hear my language in my head. Like I could hear my language. But every time I tried to speak it, I stuttered. But going back home to my community again, like I made frequent visits back to my community, and I started to pick up my language again. Now I could speak it really well. And I speak my language very well. Why I talk about those experiences, because we were part of that whole system. My mother, me, my children. But now I have grandchildren of my own. I have a teenage grandchild. He's almost 18. And what I have to say good about Native Child and Family Services is, for me as a worker working at Native Child and Family Services, I found my teammates very supportive. They're very supportive. Like when I was stuck, they'd help me out. I was just not feeling good. They'd notice a change in me. What's going on, man? It's like, and then they just come to me and pick me back up. That's what I like about Native Child and Family Services. and going to work in the community as a worker, because I did work in child welfare myself when I started at Native Child. When I started there, I was what they called family service worker then. And going out to do investigations. I took a different side, even though we had an eligibility spectrum that we had to follow. When I was talking to parents, I got into the cultural piece. You know, I try and find out what's going on with mom, like, is there language there? Is there culture? Do they practice culture? And sometimes the young kids would have a really hard time going into that adult stage. You know, they have, because they're giving their parents a really hard time. So I said, they do that very fast, because young women have a really hard time adjusting from that childhood to becoming into a woman. So I would automatically go into teachings when I was out doing my investigations. Even with the young boys, you know, they go and do their hunting and their fishing. Where's the uncles? You know, all that kind of stuff. That's what I liked about being able to do my job. And when we need to look at stuff for child welfare, we need that cultural component back. We need that cultural piece. That's where the healing begins. That's where it starts. How can you not know where you're going when you don't know where you're coming from? So that piece is very important. It's big. And I'm really happy to be part of this cultural team, because I have over 42 years of experience of working in my culture, practicing ceremony, and walking in a good way. That very treatment center I told you I did my treatment at when I was a young woman, I became a primary counselor there. Yeah, I came full circle. So that's what I did to my children. I showed them a good way of life, being able to follow our cultural practices and giving them that. You know, I had my own daughter access services I didn't know about Native Child, and I asked her, like, what do you find good about Native Child? She says, well, the resources are great. She says, the resources are good. They help you a lot. And she says, when you need something done, when they see Native Child attached to that file, she says, things get done. She says, you don't know how fast things get done when they're in the picture. So I'm here. I'm part of your cultural team, and this is where I'm at, guys. And this, I want to say Chimiigwech for having me as your grandma. Yeah, I guess those are the only words I have to say for now. I say Chimiigwech, and I'll do the closing for you when we're done. Pamapi.
Vivian Miigwech, I listen to you talk, but every time I hear something different or it comes to me in a different space, and I really love your words today, and thank you for that story, and I'm so like grateful and proud to work closely with you. Learn a lot from you every day, so Miigwech for that. Thank you. And someone else I'm grateful to work with, probably learn a lot from him too. But I guess we'll go to our last but not least speaker, Mark Atanasoff. And I guess, Mark, you're here to kind of wrap it all together and then tell us where we're going next.
All right, thanks, Terry. Thanks, Vivian. That was a great opportunity to share your experience. Frida, do you mind sharing the presentation? And thanks, Jeffrey and Ken. Great introductions. Yeah, so I thought I would start, by talking a little bit about my connection to past child removal systems. So that's my mom there in the picture. So my mother, Laura, attended the Shinnewack Indian Residential School in Sault Ste. Marie. So I witnessed firsthand the negative impacts of losing connection to language, culture, family, and community through my mom. So when she went into the Indian Residential School, she came out, didn't know her language. She left her First Nation immediately, went to Toronto and never returned. And so I grew up with the impacts of intergenerational trauma, and I saw it. And so for me, it was something that I never spent a lot of time with, but I witnessed it. It was only when I had my daughter. My daughter's currently 5. And I had all the bedtime routines and all that good joy, with being with my daughter. And then I realized, one day I said to my mom, it's like, there was nobody there who loved you, who tucked you in at night. And that still haunts me to this day, right? And so, and there was other stories, obviously, from the school, but it's that one experience as an adult that kind of like resonates me. It's like, it still haunts me to this day because I get so much joy from my daughter and being with her. So really, when we speak of these child removal systems, we know there's emotion and trauma, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. So it's really deep in our communities. So I'll go to the next slide. So this is the learning series Reason for Being. And, we have the cultural genocide, intergenerational trauma. We have very complex social issues in our community. And we have very complex systems, systems that serve kids that, many folks may not understand. And so these complex systems still have colonial roots embedded within them, as Jeffrey had mentioned. And we think that this is creating some stressors in community. And so we figured and we thought deeply, and we've done it in the past, but we want to sit with community to learn from each other. And that's really why we're doing these learning series. The next slide with learning series, how it works. So this is where we'll sit down with our service folks and we'll map things out in terms of how our service flows and how it works. And we'll present that to community. And we'll get community feedback. And Jeffrey had mentioned the advisories. And so the advisory will look at all our work. And where we can, we'll make immediate action to make change. But we do know that we operate within a system, as Jeffrey has mentioned, and there's a lot of regulations and laws. And so we know that we have to advocate. And so we know we can't do this alone. And we want to go hand in hand with community when we want to make change. And so this process is really about reflection, transparency. We want to generate some ideas and to get some action going. On the next slide, the learning series outcomes. We do want to honor the success. There has been tremendous improvement in achieving that mandate. But we know through this process, we're going to find the right balance between acknowledging success and identifying areas for change. And so we're committed to identifying areas for continuous improvement, those minor little improvements that we can make that make a big difference in people's lives. But radical innovation and disruption when we see the need in our service model and change that we need to make with the ministry and other folks. So change will require collaboration with system partners. On the next slide, the learning series schedule. So we really want to start with services that have heavy legacy mandated structures. And so today, this episode is around the overview. And this learning series will be led by service folks. So you'll hear directly from those teams. You'll have frameworks presented by quality assurance as well. But these learning series will be aired every other month. So the next session will be in December. So the next session will be about investigation. So really answering that question, why we knock on the door, and really doing a deep dive on that one. Next one will be ongoing services, how we support families. We'll be starting with family finding. So that's an example of building family supports. We'll be talking about our holistic well-being services that Ken and Jeffrey had mentioned. And this is how we provide that wraparound services that represents the bulk of the agency now. And then we'll be ending it with children in care and how we support kids to thrive. And that's going to lead us right into September 30th. That's where we do our community report back and gathering. We go to the next slide. This is our September 30th gathering and community report back. This is something that we'll be doing every year. We're going to be holding ourselves accountable to a higher standard. We'll be talking about our effectiveness of interventions, number of Indigenous children in care, plus other metrics and outcomes. And we'll report on the progress of our transformation. And this will occur every year. On the next slide. But we really want to emphasize in terms of system transformation will require partnerships. In order for us to change, we need our partners to change along with us. So this is really a systems approach. And this is where we need to work hand in hand with community. So implementing change will require advocacy. We believe this to happen, we must work in partnership with community and co-develop solutions together. So this is going to be really, this is challenging work, but one that we're committed to. On the next slide. So we are continuing a difficult conversation. So we know there's a lot of injustices out there, and we believe if we can come together in kindness, we can work together to find solutions. And child welfare is not an easy topic to discuss historically and currently. So we just really want to ground ourselves in our values and really come together and have conversation that leads to improvement in the system. On the next slide here, this is so some concerns with the mainstream child welfare system, and I think Jeffrey and Ken had identified some numbers as well. So this is the mainstream child welfare. This one's Canada-wide. You know, folks, we represent a little less than 8% of the population, but across Canada, we represent 52% of the in-care population. So, you know, that's quite alarming. And so when you go to the next slide here, in terms of concerns with mainstream child welfare systems, leaders in the mainstream child welfare system have defined that as a humanitarian crisis and have identified children and youth in care experience significantly worse outcomes than those in family settings. And so this is quite alarming to community. On the next slide. So, and as Jeffrey has mentioned and Ken has mentioned, we are doing things differently. We believe we are doing things differently. This learning series will highlight and demonstrate the differences between child welfare and the work that we do, which we call child and family well-being. We see child welfare, you know, as that surveillance, forensics, safety-focused model, and we see ourselves as a model of how can we help. It's holistic, it's integrated, it's culture, as exactly as Vivian has mentioned it. And we're not the only agency out there doing this type of work. There's an ASIO, there's a you know, over a dozen agencies doing this type of work across Ontario, and so we look forward to sharing all the stuff that we do here in the learning series. On the next slide. So we also inherited a reputation when we took on the mandate. So we feel a portion of our reputation has been informed by legacy child removal systems. We feel we have an opportunity to create a different reputation. We know we can't create a new reputation if we do the same things over and over again and replicate the contemporary systems, and this is what Jeffrey was talking about. And so we feel we have a responsibility for our community members, for the community members that we serve, so that they can have a different experience. So we believe that when you call us and that we want to make sure that you feel that you're listened to, that you're partnered with, and that you're seen as experts in the life of your own family and your own children. We believe that if you feel that you have been helped, listened to, and supported, that we will have the reputation and relationships in community that we're seeking. But we do know that reputations take a long time to build and a long time to change, and we have a lot of hard work ahead of us to do, but we are committed to it. We believe that the community and the people that need us the most will see us as something more than someone who investigates them and removes their children. And so we know this will take time. So we had mentioned the context. And so our context makes us different than others. These differences require different approaches. And so, you know, we had mentioned the historical injustices, the genocide, the interracial trauma. This has led to community structural issues. So when you look at the next slide in terms of community structural issues, you know, these are inequities in the environment in which children are born. It's the colonialism, racism, poverty, and much more that Ken has identified. And to a large part, these structural issues in community drive the overrepresentation of children in the child welfare system. However, many child welfare interventions don't necessarily solve these underlying issues in community. And this is why and where we must innovate and do things differently to respond to community need. And this is the service model that Native Child currently has. And so some of these structural issues, you know, has manifested in higher incidence of addictions, mental health, and higher intimate partner violence when we compare those to non-Indigenous groups. And so again, this is linked to that whole historical injustices, interracial trauma, and those structural issues. And so when you go to the next slide on making change in community, this is where we see solutions to community structural issues coming from the holistic and well-being support system. And this is why we're making those investments. This is why Jeffrey talks about this so much. This is why it represents a bigger part of our service model. And as a result, the overrepresentation of children in care can be viewed as a commentary on the holistic and well-being and support system. Go to the next slide. So this is holistic well-being and support system. So we see this as everything. We see this as a continuum. It's healing trauma, it's strengthening family networks, it's wraparound holistic services. It's really everything that we do. If you go to the next slide. So this is holistic well-being and support. We believe it actually includes child welfare. We see it actually as a healing opportunity for folks, and child welfare can be a resource and an option for a family's healing journey. we believe child welfare represents a small portion of the population served, and that the holistic well-being and support system interacts with many more folks. Many families are actually involved in child welfare voluntarily, and we believe the stigma around child welfare really needs to be looked at carefully, because we do see it as a healing option and as a solution for folks and an opportunity. So we'd really like to have that conversation. On the next slide. So with all that said, we actually see one system, the child and family well-being system, and this is the model that Native Child has designed itself around to serve community. And if we go to the next slide, we actually kind of even want to simplify it further, but moving from resilience to thriving, you know, we see family need, and the community can ask, you know, how can we help? And that's essentially what our model is all about, and actually the Indigenous model is all about. If you go to the next slide, the why child welfare services, and so we'll go into some technical stuff here, but we'll talk about more about this in the learning series. But you know, we do have the responsibility to keep kids safe. You know, we take that responsibility seriously. Our primary focus is to maintain kids at home, creating safety at home. We believe kids do best at home and in their communities. Our programs are designed to ensure that even though risk exists, that risk can be managed and mitigated through different approaches rather than child removal. We have implemented a holistic service model around managing the safety of children while supporting them to stay at home. We believe if we invest in families, build family capacity, build family networks, it makes families stronger, it makes children safer, and it makes community stronger. We know families can live in a world of crisis. Children may need to be placed in alternative placements temporarily, but we do work as quickly as we can to mitigate risk and to get kids back home. So we are helping families protect their own children versus protecting children from families, and we will explore more of this in the next learning series in December. On the next slide. So this is the child welfare transformation, and there's more opportunities to make innovation, but there's a couple of ones that we want to focus in on, and one of them is tools that Jeffrey had mentioned. So, you know, we do recognize that the tools that we used have not been validated by community, and some of the mandated tools include the child safety assessment, the family risk assessment, along with the eligibility spectrum code that Vivian had mentioned. And so if these are new to you, we're going to go through these in the learning series and really unpack them and to see if they really serve community. And you know, if they don't, we're going to see what innovations we can do to look at these tools. Another one is decisions. You know, we want to look at how decisions are made, how families are empowered. We want to look at checks and balances around decisions, and transparency and community confidence in decisions. So we'll look at those as well. In terms of risk perspective, we want to look at, you know, we can solve a short-term risk exposure, if you will, by bringing a child into care, but what are the long-term risk consequences of that? So we can discuss that as well and look at opportunities for innovation and change. Another one is the community wraparound services. So when we identify family risk, what are the interventions? What community resources outside of Native Child are applied? You know, we are privileged to have plenty of resources in Toronto, but we know wait lists, you know, can be an issue. In terms of experience, you know, you know, these are translations of our good intentions in terms of translating that into outcomes for folks. And then we have like laws, regulations, compliance, and funding. And so all this stuff, again, I want to emphasize that it's going to take collaboration with partners to make change or to make innovations. So go to the next slide. So this is an example of where we need advocacy. So this is changing in terms of how do we advocate. So Bill C-92, for folks that are aware, it's it promotes First Nation law over provincial law, and so there's plenty of opportunity here. But this is one area that we need to work in collaboration with community to advocate. And I can see and vision that we could go to Indigenous First Nations and advocate for uniqueness in terms of how we can support urban Indigenous folks. And I think we can do this in collaboration with the community. The next slide. So this is, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but this is, you know, these slides represent the complexities of the system, if you will. You know, these are an oversimplification, and there's many missing pieces here. But each kind of chevron here is, we can unpack that in upcoming learning series sessions. Many chevrons have, you know, colonial roots and products inside those, and we can unpack those and see how we mitigate those. We suspect, though, that we'll identify areas of success and areas that need continuous improvement. and areas that we can innovate and disrupt. And so when you look at something like this, we'll be talking about like duty to report. We can look at that eligibility spectrum. We can look at the intervention line. We can look at a response time, the child safety assessment, the family risk assessment. We can look at legal status. And so there's a lot to unpack here, but we think it'll be very, very beneficial for folks to really look at some of the systems that we traverse. Even on the next slide, we have band consultation, we have monthly visits, we have a service plan. So there's many things that we can unpack together in terms of understanding the system and seeing where we can make improvement or honoring success in terms of the innovations that we've made. And then you have like children in care, you have permanency, you have resourcing, you have culture, you have group homes. And so there's a lot to unpack in terms of understanding the system. And then we also have our holistic areas that we'll also be doing a deep dive on, and really unpacking how we offer services from the holistic perspective to community as well. And then we have plenty of examples of innovation, but we have already many great partnerships in community, and we see wraparound services from Native Child and elsewhere as a key ingredient to transformation. And we think partnerships will lead to have a dramatic impact on changing child welfare numbers over time. So that's just one example of innovations, but I think we'll have plenty of examples going forward in terms of how we can improve the system. And then the next one for next steps. We'll be doing the learning series in December, so they'll be upcoming. We have September 30th, where Every Child Matters, and we'll be doing the community report back. And through this process, we do know that folks will be made vulnerable with, inside the agency and out. And so we're just asking folks to be kind as we go through this process, and we'll make mistakes and all that good stuff. But we want to move forward, look at our systems, work together, collaborate, and see how we can make improvements for the kids. And that's it. Back to you, Tara.
Back to me. Okay. Thank you. I was just sort of looking at the questions and seeing a couple of the things that have been coming in. I know Jeffrey's answered a couple. I don't know, maybe Jeffrey, we'll start with the couple that you answered, because I don't know if everybody, all the participants can see them. So maybe it's helpful. First, one of the questions asking about, are we working cooperatively with all Indigenous child welfare agencies in Ontario? And I know, Jeffrey, you answered that.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to it, and Mark referenced it too in one of his slides that contained all of the other Indigenous. So all of the Indigenous child and family wellbeing agencies, in Ontario do work together through the Association of Native Child and Family Service Agencies of Ontario, and AFCIO. So, I had said earlier that the province has said that they want to do a redesign, and they want to see a distinct Indigenous approach. So there are tables, and there is an active discussion occurring between the ministry and all Indigenous agencies through an AFCIO. And so I think that the process that we're going through here in Toronto, other agencies are going through that in their own way, in their own jurisdictions. And we hope to come together and share that information. So yes, I mean, we have a mandate and a community responsibility and accountabilities, right? Historical accountabilities to the city of Toronto and the community members living here. And we're working hard to make changes within that area, but we hope that those changes will also contribute to larger stuff occurring across the province. Yeah.
Thank you. I also want to just note, Vivian, and many of the comments, it was a lot of gratitude for your opening and for your good words. Just wanted to convey that to you in case if you're watching the chat or not. And then a couple of questions, I'll kind of group them together, but about working with First Nations, working with urban and reserve, seeing urban centers like us, working with on reserve childcare agencies, supporting families, and then working, with band reps and places like that. So I wonder if anyone wants to talk about our response to working. Yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fine. I mean, we do have a band liaison officer at Native Child whose purpose is to work with band reps across Ontario and, of course, in other provinces as well. So we do, I mean, we frequently have band reps at our office and are in conversation with them. Ken, I don't know if you want to say anything about the history, because I know that you in the past have hosted dinners for chiefs and elders and other folks. Do you want to talk at all about the work that we do with on reserve groups?
Absolutely. Well, so there is another world of child welfare, and it's Indigenous and it's reserve based, and we are there, and we're not at the same time. So we can either stay lost or try to develop a kind of an integrated and provincial approach to child welfare that deals with the issue that this gentleman just brought up, that, you know, people are, geography is not the big variable. So yeah, we have hosted, when the chiefs met in Toronto, we had open house, and, you know, it's a slow process. I'll say that, you know, the north-south dynamic and the reserve and off-reserve dynamic, these are real dynamics. These are potentially areas of confusion and sometimes even conflict. But these are our connections. This is what we strive for. So when we talk holistic, we're talking about the engagement of all the systems, including the Chiefs of Ontario. But it's a tough one. And thank you, Jeff, for taking that file away, because, you know, it is a heavy one as well. You know, it's fraught with peril. So just to be frank, but it's a worthy work, and we have to get her done. We have to have unified voices in child welfare, no matter where kids are. They need to get good services, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's about them. So yeah, long answer. Sorry, Jeff.
No, that's good. I mean, the only other thing I'd say is, I myself have presented both to the Chiefs of Ontario and the Assembly of First Nations in the last couple of years about our support of C92 and about our position as an urban agency, which is unequivocally that we are here to help First Nations implement their inherent jurisdiction over, child and family well-being. And so we are 100% in support of those agencies moving towards C92. We work with their band reps and their agencies to make that happen. We are in conversation about community members while they're in the city of Toronto and do our best to coordinate services. But as Ken has said, there's a lot of dynamics there and there's a lot of history there. And we navigate that as best we can, always keeping the child at the center.
But I'll tell you, in the 80s, we did get a resolution from the Chiefs of Ontario, and we plainly state in our service model that we recognize jurisdiction. And so, and in truth, although people are ambivalent about child welfare, it's been my experience that the Chiefs, no matter where they're from, are happy for us to be there. Because some of them remember the days of interface with the Catholic Children's Aid and the mainstream Children's Aid and how difficult that was. So they will be very positive. I hope some are on screen, not on screen, but online here, because this could also trigger even more conversation.
Thanks. I guess maybe one more question, which is, I think this is an interesting question, and there's probably a lot, like this could be its own panel, but we know that there are a lot of political issues, socioeconomic issues that are facing Indigenous people here in Canada. And, the person who's asking the question just kind of mentions the water crisis on Mark Graves, the rejection of Indigenous experience at a federal level. I wonder if that's a reference to an ill-advised trip to Tofino. But what do we think? What could be in place here, I guess, in the context of our agency or with the work that we're doing in an urban setting to help Indigenous people address current political struggles? And I mean, I feel like just this work, the child welfare redesign and sitting with the provincial table is part of that.
Any takers? Ken, Mark, Viv, anyone want to respond? I mean, I see this work as connected to it without question. I think we need better service coordination broadly across our systems, right? And I think that's also, and we haven't really been in the weeds of the province's perspective on child welfare redesign, but at the heart of it is a recognition that the problems of child welfare are not just the problems of child welfare, they're the problems of many different sectors, right? There's finally a recognition, which we as Indigenous people have known for generations. It's by the time a child gets to the child welfare system, they've been failed by multiple systems already: housing, education, employment, healthcare, a variety of it, right? And so there's a lot of questions about whether or not, so a lot of people question, do we have enough services in place? And that's important, and we need to think about that, but we also need to think about the coordination of services that already exist and whether or not we're able to maximize those to get the benefits we need. That would be an off-the-cuff answer. Anyone else can please feel free to elaborate.
I think that's why it's those structural issues that drive the overrepresentation. So like that holistic well-being system we talk about, and it may not be recognized as a system, and that's probably, you know, where it's underfunded. That includes everything: governance, health, water, education, right? So it's bringing back the health in communities will drive down the overrepresentation in child welfare. So I think it's key to address something as simple as water, something as governance, like all those things, education. Those bring back. We go from resilient to thriving. So without clean water, you're not thriving, right? So I think it's all connected to. That's why I think the indicator of the overrepresentation in child welfare is probably not the system of child welfare. It's the investments into holistic healing. And that's where the investments is not being made. And the mainstream will call it prevention and early intervention, like Jeffrey had said. But they're not getting the dollars we need. So.
Can we get properly upstream on this? Child welfare is service to the poor. It's just another way that poor people are being oppressed. And that's generally the way things are. And child welfare has always been shy to talk about those kinds of structural issues. And indeed, when you look around the content of the child welfare discourse, those real structural issues are hardly given. Well, they're recognized but never addressed. So I think child welfare has to get generally off its butt and become really good advocates, not just for better services or more money, but it's the condition of the kids. And the fact that the child welfare is indeed service to the poor. And let me tell you, I just was on a panel from folks from Colorado. And I brought up, because I'm Canadian and we do this, a social safety net. And I brought up the need for an annual income that will allow for folks to raise their kids without the CAS coming and looking at the fridge and seeing nothing there. But you know, I alienated myself right off the bat from them because they thought I was talking about socialism. And I'm going, boy, we got a long way to go. Because if this kind of sentiment exists in Canada, which I think it does, we spend all time in the wrong agenda. I think poverty and houselessness and the other expressions of the economic inequities in this country really are the fuel for child welfare. Because you're going to overlay it with addictions, because the opiate crisis is going to have no shortage of kids to take. And we know where that stems from as well, that multi-generational, and on this I'll agree. Healing is a big issue. But let's have some of the agencies that are in child welfare start writing papers around inequities with respect to income. And I think that's part of the holistic approach.
I want to say a few words. I was just listening here to everybody talking and reflecting back on when I was young and I was involved with CAS. I had no services when I was that age. You know, you were just involved. I was told to go to treatment, I did. But what I really like about Native Child is you have so much support services. I tell people, like, access them, use them, do what you can. You know, if they're involved, and use it to your full potential. You know, we got so much services. We're not just Native Child. We provide what we need to: education, health, counseling, like it's all there. That's what I like about it. And what we need from the community is the community to work with us. We need our community to work with us as Indigenous people, as Native people, as Anishinaabe of this land. You know, sometimes I tell people where I work and they don't like me. It's like, but it's not about where I work. It's about the people we work with. We need to help them. Whatever they need, they'll tell us what they need, and we have to work with them. So we need all our service providers and all our people in the Toronto, GTA, outside, you know, to help us, work with us. And that's what I stress at this point is we need to look at that, put that component in, helping our families. That's it. Miigwech.
Which Vivian, and thank you, Mark and Jeffrey and Ken. I'm just scanning the again the Q&A area. I mean, a lot of people resonating with the conversation around poverty and how poverty impacts our families at every level. A couple questions around mental health, which I think is also part of that. And you know, one question that I think is a good place to sort of maybe end is, what's the vision? And I feel like this is probably something that we're going to answer through the learning series. Probably not something we can do in the final few minutes, but maybe that's a way that we can kind of move to closure. And so I'll ask Ken and Mark and Jeffrey to answer, and then we'll go to you, Vivian, for your answer and for the closing. So what vision do we here hope to see, would like to see moving forward to add or support the services that we're offering?
What vision do we have about the services? What vision do we have about the outcome? Is that
I think
it?
it's a fairly open question, but yeah, what's the vision? Where do we want to see this going?
Well, I mean, I don't know if Ken would say the same thing, but it goes back. Like I can't stop thinking about that Andrew Wesley quote that you always keep sharing, Ken. You got to take yourself off mute for that.
Can you pull that slide up? Because Andrew Wesley shows the vision very clearly. And the conclusion actually of my slide deck, I threw that up because that's been my inspiration.
And ever since you've said it, it's been, you know, I can't get it out of my mind. And I don't know, if, Frida, if you're able to show the very last slide of Ken's presentation. Yeah,
there it is. That's it.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
I just, you know, well, we have struggled with this because it's not less kids in care, although that's a noble mission. Because, you know, taking kids back home and having them miserable at home is still a possibility. So we have a vision that really transcends all of that and says, well, what's child welfare? And so Andrew Wesley is he's an older guy for sure. I can't imagine how he's a Cree guy, used to be a priest in, I think, the Anglican Church, and he has taken that and he's become, to me, a very strong philosophical and cultural message. And he said to me, when I said, what do you think the mission should be? And he said, you know, we never mind all this children's aid. You know, let's think about building our communities where kids experience love. They have an opportunity to have joy in their lives. And have a peaceful life, and that they're given purpose to be all that they can be. And I thought, well, that's actually the best elaboration I've ever heard, because it transcends this whole business about that kids are in good shape as long as nobody hits them. That's not necessarily true, and we know that with our kids. So we aspire to that love, that joy, that peace, and that purpose, and it comes to us from the authentic voice of somebody I admire very much. So that's my vision. It continues to be, and it's, I think, quite resonant with pretty much anybody who's been hanging around the Indigenous world. It's not just the measures of the colonial system, but our measures, which are actually higher, and that's epitomized in that list of 4 points that we strive to.
I don't think we can say it any better. Oh, maybe Mark's going to try.
I'll also throw in the technical stuff. For me, it's experiences. So as folks traverse the system, it's about experiences. And so I think that creates empowerment for families. So I think experiences is from a technical, you know, I really like focus on experiences. And then one is access to resources. I think we're blessed here in Toronto to have all the resources, not just at Native Child, but across the city. And it's getting those resources to families when they need it. So I think those two areas, I think if there's improvement in those areas, I think you'll see a dramatic improvement in the system. So those are the two areas that I see from a technical standpoint.
And then just finally, before Vivian drops a wisdom bomb on all of us, I just want to say that, like, I think a big part of this for me too, specific to the Toronto context, like to get to what, you know, Ken and Mark are talking about, is really better service coordination between Indigenous Toronto agencies around this stuff, right? Like, let's not kid ourselves. We've talked about some of the reputational challenges that come with child welfare, and that can sometimes inhibit our capacity to work together as a community across organizations to implement the vision that I think we actually all share. what Indigenous organization in a city like Toronto doesn't want that for our kids? We all want that. But we sometimes get caught up in challenges that prevent us from partnering. So another thing I think that I really hope that I see in that vision is this work being shared better across our agencies to implement that collective mission. Yeah, miigwech.
Miigwech, Jeffrey. And so Vivian, we're looking for a wisdom bomb. A wisdom bomb, a wrap it all up, and a closing, like a 3-in-1 powerhouse ending.
So you've answered all your questions from your chat?
We have.
You can, okay, well, thank you for that. I thank Mark, Jeffrey, Ken, Terry, and our host up there. Thank you, Chimiwich. When I'm thinking about us working with community, that's what it's about, working with one another. We got to work with one another. Like I said earlier, it's not all about your dislike for me or your dislike for Native Child. It's about our families, it's about our children, it's about our community and coming together and helping them. And what we need our families to do as well is do. We want to change, we want to improve, we got to put our work into it as well. What do you need? Okay, let's work together. Let's see what we can work out to improve this situation. Because we can do it. And that's all we have to do. Elder told me once he didn't like that word try. He said, you don't use that word try. He says, put do in there. So let's do this. Let's do this. Sorry, guys, I get into these little comedy things sometimes. I just gotta watch myself. But yeah. Thank you for having me join you in this panel. You know, I actually do bring some very good words of advice and personal experience, and through my own growth, where I've learned how to work, you know, to be a better person, because I was a person who used to yell too. I used to yell, you know, because I was this really angry woman. So I used to be really strong with my words. And through healing and acceptance and coming to peace with a lot of things, I come to use my voice in a good way now. You know, people hear me better when I can speak to them in a good way. So that's my little time bomb for you. I mean, my little words of wisdom. I want to close in a good way. And when I opened up, I asked Creator for a lot of things. We do a lot of asking, you know, when we're opening things up in a good way. We got to remember to give thanks. We got to thank Creator. Chimigwachomnido, Kinegebo Amijang, Chimigwach de go, Kin Mompietek, Wesiak, Nibi, Kine Modziat, Dosham Gome, Dosham Jage Mege, Chimigwach to go to Wem the Domompi. Even on Magego, Mina, Yuam the Ma, Chimigwach to go in Segi Shugak. So thank you, Creator, for all that you have given us. Thank you for all the food you provide for us, for the water that you give us, for the people that are involved in our lives. Thank you, Creator, for our health and our minds. Miigwech. Mia, thank you.
Miigwech, Vivian, thank you. And thank you, Ken and Jeffrey and Mark, for being here with us today. And most importantly, thank you all the participants and those folks who took time out of their day to join us and have this important conversation. The session was recorded. It will be posted and shared. Share with all your friends. And we look forward to seeing you in December for our next installment. Miigwech, everyone. Bamapi.
Okay.